Welcome back to Give the People What They Want. We have a lot to dig into today. Mamdani, disputed elections, Trump threatening war and trade war everywhere. So stay tuned. We're going to get into all of it in a minute.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup.
Well, today I can proudly say that I'm very proud to be a New Yorker. We elected Zohran Mamdani last night as the next mayor of New York City. I mean, I know people were watching this race from across the world. It has really captured global attention, giving hope to a lot of people that the fact that in the center of global capitalism, the center of imperialism, African, Indian, Muslim socialist was actually elected. And I think it's like, I mean, I watched part of his, watched the speech last night. He comes out to a great song. He's not playing America the Beautiful. It's a real, as the kids would say, vibe shift. But, obviously it's a much more profound political and cultural shift, and it's sending shockwaves, obviously, across the ruling class in the United States who are running scared. The cover of the New York Post this morning, it was like Mamdani in like a Halloween costume with like a hammer and sickle. I mean, they are freaking out. We saw in the last week atrocious and racist and vile insults lodged at him by billionaires. I mean, these people are like the most powerful people in the world, and they're scared of a 34-year-old socialist. I think that really speaks to the power of his campaign, the power of what he's saying, and the power of how he's moving people. In this campaign, he won by a really solid margin, by the way, against Andrew Cuomo, who is an establishment Democrat, but because he was, incapable of winning because he's accused of sexual assault, he was a horrible governor, so many other things. He lost in the Democratic primaries in June. He ran as an independent. He lost by over 10 points to Mamdani last night. It really also shows where is the Democratic Party. They're begrudgingly accepting Mamdani. They're begrudgingly saying, yeah, like that was a really great campaign. But of course, this is not what they want. So major shifts happening here. Again, so many people that were activated and participated in the campaign, 90,000 volunteers, at least, that were involved in the campaign. Over 3 million doors knocked. There's 8 million people in the city of New York. That's a massive amount. And obviously those 90,000 people, now that they've been engaged and involved in something, fighting for something, they're not going to stop there. So it's a really exciting moment. And I think rightfully so, people across the world, and of course, people in New York City, people in the United States, at this moment where Trump is literally threatening people's rights, threatening communities, threatening the left. This is a tremendous kind of show of hope and force. Of course, Trump has already threatened Mamdani, not only with these, again, like really want to underscore how racist and violent these threats are against him, but also threatened to pull funding from New York City, threatened to deploy the National Guard like we've seen him do in other Democratic-run cities. So it is like a very tense moment, and we're going to see just how material those threats are. Again, Trump made his name for himself in New York City. It is the center of finance capital. We have every single major hedge fund, financial institution headquartered in New York City. Mamdani wants to raise the corporate tax. He wants to actually make these billionaires pay for all of the money that they're stealing from working people. So, I'm looking forward to free and fast buses. I know families in the city are going to be looking forward to free childcare, to actually having the people who are in rent stabilized buildings having their rent frozen. It's exciting. I know, of course, there's contradictions, and we're going to see the limitations of someone working within the confines of the Democratic Party, working, of course, trying to make systemic change within a liberal bourgeois state. But I think the cultural impact of this and just the fact that people are going to have hope and confidence in the left winning is really exciting. Let's celebrate the moment. I don't know if you guys want to say how it's been received internationally. Prasanth, I know we've seen, I mean, this is some exciting some exciting stuff for the Indian left.
Right, absolutely. Not to mention that it was a bit of a blow for the right wing in India that he ended during the course of his speech. He did acknowledge Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, whose project has been a big bugbear for the right wing in India. So that's an amusing aside. But it's interesting to know. I think across the world, it's interesting to note how he campaigned, especially the kind of sense he brought, to people in the left. The suggestion that victory is possible if you run a disciplined campaign, if you run a campaign based on an economic message. All those are aspects that are, I think, common to the left across the world. So there has been, I think, like you said, people are of course cautious for a variety of reasons, which is definitely warranted. But at the same time, very, very important to acknowledge this victory. And I think on the side, I should also mention that another instance of a substantial leftist victory, a communist victory, which is much, much less reported, is Kerala's elimination of extreme poverty in the state of Kerala in India. I encourage everyone to go to People's Dispatch to read an extensive report on that. And I think it's a good, it's a good companion piece when you're analyzing what the left can do in a concerted, even at a local level, what the left can do. It's an excellent example of that. So, yeah.
Okay, Roger, give us your hot take from across the pond.
Reminded me very much of Corbyn's victory when he became leader of the Labour Party and went on to post a very, very, very good election results as well. But of course, what he did as well was it galvanised the riots. And I think that's what we have to be really careful of, because they haven't gone away. But I think it's a time for celebration, but it's also a time where we be realistic about what is being faced here, because the might of the capitalist class will form against them. I think it was brilliant that one of the first things he said when he came on stage last night was to quote Eugene Debs. And I thought that said a lot. And his message that we need to turn up the volume, I think, is something that the left everywhere needs to listen to, because I think that's what we all need to be doing.
Amazing. Yeah, I think not shying away from those, quote unquote, radical demands, not shying away from that central message that actually brought people out. Obviously, the centrist message is not moving anyone. It's not been successful. They haven't been able to galvanize anyone. And also, totally right, Prasanth, the Kerala victory is so important and continues to be kind of a shining star for us to look towards. All that being said, unfortunately, not all is great in this country. And Trump continues to lodge, seemingly insane threats of war against we're not actually right now talking about the Caribbean, but we're talking about Africa's most populous country, Nigeria. Roger, what is this all about?
Well, I think it's about a couple of things. First of all, one of the first things I was always taught about something like this is you look at, well, what are the mineral resources that the capitalist class are looking for? And obviously there's oil aplenty within Nigeria. So clearly, as they always do, they're looking at access to oil. But I think there's something else as well. And it's something that the Nigerians have been talking about in the last few days, which is that they think that this is a ploy by the US to try and establish a huge military presence within Nigeria. And they, the United States has seen the instability, if you like, across West Africa, but unstable because they haven't got control over the kind of progressive forces that are making progress within the west of Africa. And of course, Nigeria is huge. And these kind of, 200 million plus people, and the idea that the United States is going to attack Nigeria is frankly absurd. But more absurd is the kind of comments that are being made about why they're even suggesting this, that there is somehow a purge, almost a genocide. I mean, they wouldn't use that word, of course, being carried out against Christians within Nigeria. And of course, this is very similar to the kind of unsubstantiated claims that are being made about what's happening in South Africa as well. So there's an upping of the tensions by the US. And I think that probably what the Nigerians are saying about the US trying to get access to their oil, but also about the military base, I think is one we have to keep an eye on, and just hope that the Nigerian authorities don't cave into this idea that they can somehow get some peace and stability, in scare quotes, by granting the United States the ability to have yet another base on the African continent.
I mean, it is truly unprecedented. I think it's definitely important to pay attention to the discourse and the amount of money invested in this. And we've seen, I don't even know what to call them, but cultural influencers in the United States somehow rallying behind this claim seems quite coordinated. But I highly recommend you read the article, or listeners read the article by Pavan Kulkarni on our page. Really dives into a lot of these details, debunking actually a lot of these claims and giving more historical context to what's happening and what we're seeing right now. Okay, Prasanth, Trump in another place doing maybe a little more positive things. He visited South Korea last week. Of course, a really unfortunate trade deal was made with South Korea, but China seems to have gotten a better situation. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think the terms of trade, so to speak, or the terms of engagement have drastically shifted. And one of the signs, of course, I think, is the fact that a lot of the media in the West is suddenly beginning to wake up and realize that, hey, things are not the same anymore. China is not just a competitor, but is actually setting the agenda. And that's actually, I think, a good sign. The kind of moral panic that you're seeing in a lot of media establishments is actually reflective of what's happening on the ground, which is the fact that while Trump did start the tariff wars and all, a few months ago, he expanded the kind of restrictions on that the US was imposing on Chinese companies, for instance, the technology restrictions. China's response, which was to actually place conditions on the export of rare earth minerals. Rare earths basically actually was a substantial pushback. And I think there's an article on People's Dispatch again, and a Globetrotter by Prabir Purkar that actually explains some of the dynamics behind it. It's sometimes difficult to estimate what kind of a role these rare earths play in every aspect of day-to-day technology, and equally importantly, the kind of control, the kind of dominance China has on these rare earths, not just in terms of the mining, but also in terms of the processing. And this is something that has been established over the course of through a very patient, straight-driven approach, a very planned approach, and this has really helped China build self-reliance. And this is the only thing that kind of actually, prevents the US from exercising its will. And it's a great lesson, I think, to countries across the world. The only way to not be bullied is by basically establishing, maybe your own supply chains, establishing your own economic competencies, reducing the level of reliance, the amount of pressure points that the US is able to, and the US has leverage on. And this was a classic example of how the Chinese are now setting the rules of engagement, or so to speak, whatever. And this is actually forced Trump to withdraw. So we see that now there's been some kind of a truce. All the punitive measures from both sides are postponed by a year. There are some agreements on purchase of soybean and ports and all that. But I think those are the technical details. It's a different question how long these details are going to last. The truce might break. But I think the more important thing to take out of this is the fact that for maybe the third or fourth time, Trump exerted pressure, China refused to blink, and Trump was forced to retreat. And this is kind of becoming a trend right now, and it actually demonstrates the fact that the United States has, as time passes, less leverage. And I think it's a great example for countries in the global south, all of whom have faced bullying from China, from the United States. We see India facing such bullying. We see Russia, South Africa, Brazil, so many other countries in the form of tariffs, in the form of other kind of pressure. We're talking about, say, Nigeria right now, which is suddenly facing, we're talking about Venezuela right now. Of course, all of these countries can't establish, because of China's size and the kind of economic power it has. They can't establish the same scale of, scale of economic growth or control over resources. But nonetheless, I think it's important to consider alternatives, whether it be blocks, whether it be trading blocks, new trading arrangements. But I think this is a very decisive moment in terms of how we see what the US can and cannot do in the coming years.
It's a well taken point, and I think especially when you look at it compared to the South Korea deal, which, I mean, it's been the United States' best friend, and now it's somehow having to pay and invest in US industry just to have a tariff rate that's not even that good. So it's a really, and I think China has been trying to incentivize this in countries and inculcate this kind of need and drive to actually develop one's own productive forces to be able to stand up to these kind of bullying tactics. So we're jumping back to the African continent. We've seen the news in Sudan. We've seen the news in Darfur. Roger, break it down for us a little bit. What's at play here, and who's kind of benefiting from this?
Well, I mean, we've covered this quite extensively. Obviously, People's Dispatch, Globetrotter, Morning Star, we've all looked at this issue. 40,000 plus people killed during this so-called civil war. And I'll come back to so-called in a moment. 14 million people at least driven from their homes. I mean, these numbers are immense, and just since the Rapid Support Forces, so the paramilitary group, took over El Fasher, 71,000 displaced from that area. I mean, these are huge numbers. But one of the points I wanted to make about so-called was because one of the outside interventions in all of this is Qatar. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows that they're involved, but somehow they've managed to maintain this position of being the good guy still, when they're behind all of this, and they need to be called out for this. But one of the key points that I think is been missing from this debate, which I know Globetrotter and People's Dispatch and we at the Morning Star tried to emphasize, is the role of civil society in Sudan, because it never gets talked about. They've never been involved in any of the kind of discussions about how this conflict is going to be resolved. And so for me, I wanted to make that point, Zoe, that we need to, that anybody watching this really needs to prioritize the voice of the Sudanese people. It's not enough just to think of this as, well, if the conflict is somehow stopped and either the military or the Rapid Support Forces are in power, or there's another coalition between them, or whatever, the people were robbed of their democratic rights in the first place by these groups, and that needs to be kept in mind, and their voice is amplified.
I think it's very well taken, Roger. And now that there is more attention on Sudan, we have to make sure that the narrative isn't dominated by, oh, this horrible thing that's happening. Who knows why it's happening? I mean, there's deep political interests here. And the Sudanese people have been speaking out about what they want and how they see true democracy for years now. So it's time that we listen. Prasanth, this last week has seen disputed elections, surprising electoral victories, surprising responses by the people in some ways, violence, repression. What's happening in Cameroon and Tanzania?
Right, Zoe. Actually, in some senses, we began with one election. There's another side of the electoral spectrum, so to speak, where we have, in fact, it's not just Cameroon, Tanzania, but also Cote d'Ivoire or the Ivory Coast, 3 countries where incumbent presidents have come back to power in very problematic circumstances, to say the least. Of course, Cameroon and Tanzania is probably the most brutal. We are getting reports of hundreds of people killed. Internet is patchy. President Samia Hassan has won a second term by a massive landslide, but won that victory by excluding all the key challengers. Similarly, in Cameroon, we have Paul Biya, who is likely to be 100 years old by the time his current term ends. We're talking about someone who's been in power for 45 years, right? And again, protests took place. The latest reports, some reports say up to 50 people were killed in the protests that took place. Again, once again, the key contenders are not allowed to contest. The same happens in Ivory Coast as well. So all of these candidates finally ending up contesting against opponents who are not probably the strongest in the field. But I think the larger question we need to ask from at this point is really, what does this mean for a continent like Africa, where such a huge percentage of the population comprises young people who are struggling for opportunities. In all of these countries, we see very similar concerns. We see there's a lack of opportunities for the youth. We see the problem of corruption. We see inflation in many of these places. We see a general sense of desperation and hopelessness that people, especially the youth, are feeling with this order which has existed for a long time. And I think it's also important to note that especially in countries like the alternative that countries in the Sahel have offered in terms of military coups, military regimes, in which often middle-ranking officers have come to power and have put forward an entirely new agenda, an agenda of dignity, of opposing imperialism. Of course, they're facing a lot of challenges. We know right now, for instance, that people in Mali are facing massive challenges in the capital, Bamako. But nonetheless, the kind of politics they have presented is something very different from what leaders like those of Alassane Ouattara of Ivory Coast or Paul Biya of Cameroon are offering to the citizens right now. And this really leads to the question as to how long will this hold? We saw what happened in Madagascar a few weeks ago, where there was this massive protest, one of the youngest countries in the continent. So it's a very, very difficult moment, especially in Tanzania, where as of now, I think communication still has not been restored. So tough times for people in those regions.
And we're definitely going to be following those stories. I think the situation in Tanzania, of course, without internet connection is really difficult to verify and know what's happening. But we'll be back with you next week. We got a quick show today, a lot packed in there. Tune in next week. We're going to go into depth on these things. Once again, bring you the latest and everything you need to know across the world.